Your presence feels like a burden I carry with me. I chose to sell my father's company. My son expressed his heartfelt wishes for your success with your rent. I smiled and replied with genuine warmth. All right, sending you heartfelt wishes for all the best in your journey ahead. As they stepped into Milan, they paused to glance at their bank accounts. I'm truly delighted to have you here with us. Come along with me on this adventure until the very end, and let me know where you're listening from, so I can truly value the journey my tale has taken. As I gently arranged the vibrant lilies in the crystal vase, my mind wandered, and the serene quiet was suddenly interrupted by the familiar sound of Wade's car gliding into the driveway. The growl of his BMW's engine sends a chill down my spine, knotting my stomach with apprehension. 3 long months had passed since our last conversation, and he only decided to contact me when he needed something in return. From my vantage point by the window, I watched as he emerged from the driver's seat, carefully adjusting his tailored suit jacket with a sense of purpose. Brittany followed closely, the rhythmic click of her heels resonating on the pavement as she gracefully tucked a strand of her flowing blonde hair behind her ear. Even from a distance, I could feel the unwavering strength in her jawline. Regardless of the circumstances surrounding them, she was the one guiding the journey. The doorbell rang out with a sharp, insistent tone, echoing through the quiet space. I set the vase down softly on the table and walked toward the front door, my heart preparing for the disappointment that was sure to come. As I opened it, Wade barely acknowledged my presence. "Mom," he said, his tone cutting through the silence as he stepped inside without a greeting. "We ought to have a heartfelt discussion." Brittany moved gracefully, her scent filling the small entryway with a captivating allure. She clutched the leather briefcase with a fierce grip, as though it were her only protection from the chaos surrounding her. "Hello, Agatha," she said, with a sweetly deceptive tone that sent chills racing down my spine. I led them into the living room, the exact spot where Wade had taken his first steps all those years ago. 35 to be precise. He lingered in the center, a solitary figure, arms folded, his eyes wandering beyond me, absorbing the world that surrounded him. "How about a cup of coffee? I just brewed a new pot," I suggested, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. This was more than a casual conversation, Wade declared, his voice cutting through the air with an intensity I had never encountered before. "Mom, would you mind sitting down for a moment? We have a significant matter that requires our attention." As I nestled into my cherished armchair, the very one Harold and I had selected together so many years ago, a sudden wave of fatigue swept through my legs. Brittany took her place across from me, methodically opening her briefcase with a sense of purpose. Wade loomed above, his presence enveloping the two of us in a palpable tension. "The company has been sold," he announced, with a casualness that implied he was simply remarking on the weather. The words resonated within me, carrying a weight that seemed almost palpable. "What do you mean by sold?" Brittany picked up a substantial stack of papers and set them down on the coffee table that sat between us. "The transaction was completed yesterday morning," she remarked, her tone straightforward. "Wade has been handling all the paperwork for quite some time now." I stared at the documents, my vision starting to blur slightly. The venture that Harold and I had meticulously built from scratch, the very cornerstone that had sustained our family for countless years, had disappeared. "Still, I find myself as the main stakeholder," I whispered. Wade let out a harsh, cutting laugh. "Mom, it's been 3 years since you withdrew from the everyday rhythms of life. Ever since Dad left us, it appears that you may have drifted away from the financial details completely." I couldn't let that stand. I insisted, even as my voice wavered, nearly swallowed by the weight of the moment. "Look at you," Brittany interjected, her perfectly manicured nails gesturing toward me with a mix of curiosity and intrigue. "This house feels like a heavy burden to bear. The bills pile up on your kitchen counter, staying there for weeks, a constant reminder of what needs to be addressed. You have a habit of missing appointments. Just last month, you contacted Wade 3 times in one day, asking about the same issue. A gentle warmth enveloped my cheeks. It was true that I had been contacting Wade more frequently since Harold's passing, but it wasn't due to confusion. Instead, it arose from a deep sense of loneliness and a desire for companionship in navigating my choices. Wade took a seat directly opposite me, leaning in with his elbows propped on his knees, an intensity in his posture that drew me in. Mom, you've arrived at the beautiful milestone of 64. Ever since Dad walked away, you've been navigating through so many difficulties. The organization needs dynamic leadership and fresh ideas. I can't stand watching you undermine it like this. The company is flourishing, I declared, my tone firmer now. The quarterly reports reveal the foundation Dad established long ago. Wade interjected. Yet the industry is evolving. Innovation, efficiency, online promotion. You seem to be missing the point entirely. Brittany offered a knowing nod, her expression filled with understanding. We have no intention of causing you any pain. Agatha, we're here to keep you safe. The buyer offered a significantly higher price than what the market typically dictates. The funds will ensure your comfort for a lifetime. I glanced between them, hoping to catch a glimpse of the son I once knew, the little boy who would seek comfort in my lap during the thunderous storms that frightened him. Instead, I noticed a man whose eyes held a flicker of barely hidden impatience as he regarded me. What is the cost? I inquired softly. Wade and Brittany shared a meaningful look. He mentioned $8 million. By Friday, after accounting for taxes and fees, your account will reflect approximately $9 million. It was an excellent price, truly exceptional. In fact, yet, the money wasn't the focus. You went ahead and sold our company without consulting me first. I'm asking you now, Wade said, his voice carrying an air of finality that left no room for further discussion. I'm asking you to sign these papers, making it official, to acknowledge that the sale was in your best interest. Brittany leaned forward, her voice taking on that syrupy quality again. Think about it, Agatha. No more board meetings, no more worrying about employee problems or market fluctuations. You can focus on what really matters. Your garden, your book club, maybe some travel. Wade stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. When he turned back, his face was hard. The truth is, Mom, you're a burden. You have been ever since Dad died. You call me constantly with questions that any competent business owner should know. You second-guess every decision I make, even though you don't understand the modern marketplace. The word burden hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I felt something inside me crack. Not break exactly, but crack like ice, beginning to thaw. I sold Dad's company because it was the right thing to do. Wade continued, his voice rising slightly. For the business, for the employees, and for you. Good luck with the rent on your new apartment, because this house is going to cost more to maintain than you can afford on a fixed income. Brittany shot him a warning look, but he ignored it. You're my son, I said softly, more to myself than to him. And you're my mother, he replied. Which is why I'm doing this. Someone has to make the hard decisions. And clearly, it's not going to be you. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was strangely calm, like the eye of a hurricane. When I finally looked up, both Wade and Brittany were watching me expectantly. Okay, I said simply. Good luck. Wade blinked. What? I said okay. Good luck. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt. I assume you'll need me to sign those papers. Where? Brittany fumbled with the documents, clearly expecting more of a fight. Here, an initial there. I signed where they indicated, my handwriting steady, despite the tremor I felt inside. When I finished, I handed the pen back to Brittany and walked toward the front door. That's it, Wade called after me. You're not going to argue, not going to guilt-trip me about family loyalty. I turned back to face him, my hand on the doorknob. Would it change anything? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I didn't think so. I said, have a wonderful time in Milan. I hope the weather is nice for your honeymoon. Brittany's eyes widened. How did you know about Milan? I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. I know more than you think I do. After they left, I sat back down in my armchair and looked around the living room. Everything was exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. Yet everything had changed. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but expectant. Like the moment before dawn, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Marcus, it's Agatha. I think it's time we had that conversation. Marcus arrived within the hour, carrying the same worn leather satchel he'd been using since I first met him 25 years ago. My longtime attorney, and more importantly, my friend, looked exactly as I expected him to. Concerned, but not surprised. "I take it Wade went through with it?" he said, settling into Harold's old chair without ceremony. Every word exactly as we predicted. I poured him coffee from the pot I'd made earlier, my hands steadier now than they'd been in months. He called me a burden. Marcus, his exact words. Marcus shook his head, his gray eyebrows knitting together. "I'm sorry, Agatha. I know we prepared for this, but it still must have hurt." I sat across from him, cradling my own cup. The hurt stopped, surprising me years ago. What surprises me is how predictable he's become. "Shall we review the timeline?" Marcus asked, pulling out a thick folder from his satchel. I nodded, though I knew every detail by heart. We'd been planning this for 3 years, ever since Harold's funeral, when Wade had pulled me aside and suggested I might want to simplify my business responsibilities. It started in 1983. I began, my voice taking on the cadence of a story I'd told many times. Harold and I were both 25, fresh out of college, and completely broke. I had a business degree and a head full of ideas. He had charisma and the ability to charm investors. Marcus smiled, the classic combination, except everyone assumed Harold was the brains of the operation. I set down my coffee cup with a soft clink. The bank loans were approved because of his charm. The early partnerships happened because men in the 80s were more comfortable dealing with other men. So we played the game. I walked to the mahogany desk in the corner, pulling out a framed photograph from the bottom drawer. It showed Harold and me at the ribbon cutting for our first office building. He was holding the scissors, beaming at the camera. I was standing slightly behind him, my hand on his shoulder, smiling but watching the crowd. I was always watching, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. While Harold worked the room, I was calculating who had real influence, who was just talking big, which deals would actually materialize, and the company structure. Marcus prompted. Officially, Harold owned 60%, I owned 40%, but the real power was in the subsidiary companies, the holding trusts, the intellectual property rights, all things I set up and managed, while Harold focused on the public face of the business. I opened another drawer, this one filled with documents that Wade had never seen. When Wade joined the company 8 years ago, Harold was already showing signs of his heart condition. We knew we needed to plan for succession. Marcus pulled out his reading glasses. "That's when you established the Meridian Trust." Exactly. I felt a familiar satisfaction, remembering how carefully we'd constructed it. 70% of the company's actual value, the patents, the international contracts, the commercial real estate holdings, was transferred to a trust with me as the sole beneficiary. The remaining 30%, which included the day-to-day operations and the company name, stayed in the traditional corporate structure, and Wade knew none of this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Wade knew what he wanted to know. He was so eager to prove himself, to show that he could run things better than his old-fashioned parents. He never asked the right questions. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows now, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny secrets. I remembered another afternoon, almost exactly a year ago, when I'd overheard Wade on the phone in Harold's old office. He was talking to Brittany. I said, the memory still sharp. She was asking about the company's assets, about whether I had any real control over the finances. Wade laughed and said I was just a figurehead, that I'd never understood the business side of things anyway. Marcus made a note on his legal pad. That's when you decided to accelerate the timeline. That's when I realized my son had never really known me at all. I returned to my chair, feeling the weight of decades settling around me. For 35 years, I've been the woman behind the curtain. I've let Harold take credit for my ideas, let Wade believe I was just his scatterbrained mother who needed protection. Why? Marcus asked gently. It was a question he'd posed many times over the years, because I thought it was what they needed from me. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with my finger. Harold needed to feel like the success was his. His pride required it. And Wade needed to believe he was rescuing me from my own incompetence. It gave him purpose, but Harold knew the truth. Harold knew. My voice softened, especially at the end. The night before he died, he made me promise something. He said, "Don't let Wade take advantage of your kindness the way I did. Make sure he learns what you're really worth." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with the look of someone who'd known me long enough to read between the lines. And now, Wade has sold what he thinks is our entire company for $8 million. I smiled, and this time, there was definitely humor in it. What he doesn't know is that he sold about 30% of the actual value. The shell, you might say. The Meridian Trust holdings are worth, as of yesterday's valuation, approximately $2 million. I pulled out a financial statement from the desk drawer. The patents alone are worth $4 million. The commercial properties we own in Houston and Phoenix are worth another $5 million. The international distribution rights account for the rest. Marcus whistled low, and Wade has no idea. Wade has spent the last 3 years telling me I don't understand modern business. He's probably right. I don't understand why you'd sell a profitable company without doing due diligence on its actual assets. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Harold and I had planted together. Do you know what Wade said to me last Christmas? He said I was living in the past, that I needed to accept that the business world had moved beyond what a woman of my generation could understand. What did you tell him? I told him he was probably right. I turned back to Marcus, and then I made 3 new international deals and increased our patent portfolio by 40%. Marcus closed his folder and leaned forward. So what happens now? Now, we wait for Wade and Brittany to arrive in Milan. They're staying at the Palazzo Parigi, the presidential suite. I booked it for them myself as a wedding gift, using company funds that no longer exist. Using funds from an account that Wade thinks contains his inheritance money. I felt a small flutter of anticipation in my chest. The account that will show a zero balance when they try to access it tomorrow morning. And the 53 calls. I laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet room. That's just an estimate. Knowing Wade, it might be more. Marcus packed his papers back into his satchel, but he didn't stand to leave. Agatha, are you sure about this? Once this plays out, there's no going back with Wade. I considered his question, really considered it. Was I sure? Was I ready to lose my son completely in order to teach him who I really was? Marcus, I said finally, I lost my son the day he decided I was a burden. Everything that happens now is just me getting my dignity back. After Marcus left, I sat alone in the house that suddenly felt more like home than it had in years. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Carla, it's Agatha. Yes, I know it's been a while. Listen, I have a proposition for you. How would you feel about running a company again? As I talked, outlining my plans for expanding the business Wade had just unknowingly signed away, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt like myself again, the real me, the woman who'd built an empire while everyone thought she was just serving coffee and keeping the books. Tomorrow, Wade would learn the difference. Whether he could handle the truth remained to be seen. The first call came at exactly 9:47 a.m. Milan time, which was 2:47, where I was sitting in my kitchen, wide awake, with a cup of chamomile tea. I had been counting down the hours, knowing that Wade and Brittany would try to access their funds first thing in the morning after their arrival. I let it ring. The second call came 3 minutes later, then another. By the 5th call, my phone was vibrating so aggressively on the kitchen table that it nearly fell to the floor. I picked it up on the 6th ring. Hello, Wade. Mom. His voice was strained, panic barely contained beneath a thin veneer of control. There's a problem with the bank accounts, some kind of technical issue. The funds from the sale aren't showing up. I took a slow sip of my tea. That's strange. Have you called the bank? Of course I called the bank. The veneer was already cracking. They said the account was closed yesterday afternoon. Closed. Mom, how does an account just close itself? I wouldn't know. Dear, banking isn't really my area of expertise. As you've reminded me many times. There was a pause, and I could hear Brittany's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Wade covered the phone, but I could still make out her words. Tell her to fix it. Now, Mom. Wade's voice was back, more controlled, but with an edge I'd never heard before. I need you to call Marcus. There's obviously been some kind of mistake with the paperwork. The sale money should have been deposited yesterday. I'll call him in the morning, I said pleasantly. It's nearly 3 a.m. Here, Wade. I'm sure whatever it is can wait until business hours. No, it can't wait. The control snapped completely. We're in Milan. Mom, we have reservations. Plans. I paid for a suite at one of the most expensive hotels in Europe. Our cards aren't working either. I made a sympathetic clicking sound with my tongue. That does sound inconvenient. I hope you brought some cash for emergencies. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Wade's breathing, which was becoming increasingly ragged. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously low. Mom, I'm going to ask you once more, and I need you to listen very carefully. Call Marcus right now and find out where our money is. Our money. I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting each word. I wasn't aware that you and I had any joint accounts. Wade, the money from the sale, my inheritance, the $8 million. That should be in my account right now. I set down my teacup with deliberate care. Oh, that money? Yes, I know exactly where that is. Thank God. I heard him exhale. So, call Marcus and it's in my account. I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Wade's voice came back, barely above a whisper. What did you say? I said the money is in my account. Where it's always been. Where it will stay. The explosion was immediate. What the hell are you talking about? I sold the company. I have the paperwork. You signed it yourself. Yes, you did sell the company. And yes, I did sign the papers. You sold 30% of Herald Industries for $8 million. Quite a good price for what you actually owned. All things considered. I could hear Brittany now, her voice getting closer to the phone. What is she saying? Wade. What is she talking about? Mom. Wade's voice was shaking now, whether from rage or fear. I couldn't tell. Stop playing games. You can't do this. The company was Dad's. It's mine now. The company name was your father's. Yes. And the daily operations, the employee payroll, the office lease in downtown Austin, all of that was yours to sell. And you did. Congratulations. Then where? His voice cut off abruptly, and I knew he was beginning to understand. Where are the assets? I finished for him. The patents, the international contracts, the commercial real estate, the manufacturing rights. Those were never part of what you inherited. Dear, those were always mine. The phone clattered, and I heard Brittany's voice clearly now. Give me that phone. Mrs. Holloway, this is Brittany. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Hello, Brittany. How's the weather in Milan? Never mind the weather. Wade is telling me you're claiming ownership of assets that rightfully belong to him. That's not legally possible. I've seen the incorporation papers. You've seen some incorporation papers. I corrected. The ones Wade wanted you to see. Tell me, did you happen to review the Meridian Trust documents? Or the Patterson Holdings subsidiary? Or perhaps the intellectual property assignments filed with the state of Delaware? The silence told me everything I needed to know. I didn't think so. I continued. You see, Brittany, when you spend 40 years building a business, you learn to protect your interests. You learn that sometimes the most important assets are the ones that aren't written on the letterhead. Wade's voice came back on the line, and now there was definitely fear there. Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. We're family. Yes, we are family, which is why you felt comfortable calling me a burden and selling what you thought was my life's work without even consulting me. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out at the sunrise, beginning to paint the sky pink. Tell me, Wade, did you really think I was so senile that I wouldn't know what you were planning? I wasn't planning anything. I was trying to help you. You were trying to help yourself to what you thought was an easy inheritance. The difference is that you were counting on me being the helpless old woman you've convinced yourself I am. Brittany grabbed the phone again. This is elder abuse. We're going to sue you for everything you have. I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. With what money, dear? And which lawyers? The ones you haven't paid yet, because you're standing in a hotel lobby in Milan without access to funds. We'll figure it out, Wade said. Back on the line now. I'll call everyone I know. I'll call Dad's old business partners. They'll loan me the money to fight this. You mean the business partners whose contracts are now void because the company they partnered with no longer exists in any meaningful form? I asked. Or perhaps you mean the ones who are currently negotiating new, more lucrative deals with Meridian Trust. The sound that came through the phone was something between a growl and a sob. You planned this. You planned all of this. I prepared for it. I corrected. There's a difference. I hoped you would prove me wrong. I hoped you would show me that you valued our relationship more than you valued what you could take from me. I do value our relationship. No, Wade, you value what you thought our relationship could get you. There's a difference there. 2. I heard hotel lobby sounds in the background, voices speaking rapid Italian, and the unmistakable ding of an elevator. They were clearly trying to sort out their situation in public, which couldn't be pleasant. How long have you known? Wade asked quietly. Known what? Known that I was going to sell the company. I considered lying, making it seem like I'd just recently figured it out, but Wade deserved the truth, even if it was going to hurt. 3 years. I said simply, since the week after your father's funeral, when you told me I should probably start thinking about simplifying my business responsibilities. 3 years, he repeated numbly. 3 years of watching you circle like a vulture, waiting for the right moment to convince me I was incompetent. 3 years of listening to you and Brittany whisper about my memory, my capabilities, my age. 3 years of preparing for this exact conversation. Brittany's voice was back, shrill now with panic. We can't stay here without money. Do you understand that? We're going to be thrown out of this hotel. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I said. You're both so much more capable than I am. After all, surely a little problem, like being stranded in Europe without funds, is nothing for people with your business acumen. Mom, please. Wade's voice broke on the word. I made a mistake. I see that now. Just tell me what I have to do to fix this. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of maternal instinct, the desire to rescue him, to make everything better, to be the mother who solved all his problems. But then I remembered sitting in my living room yesterday, listening to him call me a burden. You can start by figuring out how to get home from Milan without my help, I said. Consider it a learning experience in problem solving. You can't just abandon us here. I'm not abandoning you, Wade. I'm letting you experience what independence feels like. Isn't that what you wanted? To be free of your burden of a mother. The phone went quiet, except for the sound of Wade's breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was small, defeated. What happens now? Now you learn what I've always known, I said, watching the sunrise paint the world in shades of gold. That family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. And respect isn't something you inherit, Wade. It's something you earn. I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. According to my count, that had been call number 13. If my estimates were correct, I had 40 more to go. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and settled back at the kitchen table with my tablet. I had emails to read, business decisions to make, and a company to run. The real company, the one that had never stopped being mine. Outside, the world was waking up to a beautiful new day. By noon, my phone had recorded 37 missed calls. I turned the ringer back on around 10. Curious to hear how the tone of Wade's messages would evolve as his situation became more desperate. I wasn't disappointed. The messages progressed from confused to angry, to pleading, to threatening, and back to pleading again. Brittany's voice appeared more frequently as the morning wore on, her earlier politeness completely abandoned in favor of increasingly shrill demands. I was in my garden, pruning the roses Harold had planted for our 20th anniversary, when call number 38 came in. This time, I answered on the first ring. Good afternoon, Wade. Mom, his voice was hoarse now, exhausted. We need to talk, really talk. I'm listening, not on the phone, face to face. We're coming home. I paused in my pruning, considering this development. With what money? I believe you mentioned that your cards weren't working. I called Uncle Robert. He's wiring us money for plane tickets. Harold's brother Robert, the one who'd always been jealous of our success. I could only imagine the conversation Wade had with him, probably painting me as a vindictive old woman who'd stolen his rightful inheritance. That was resourceful of you, I said. We'll be back tomorrow evening. Will you be home? This is my home. Wade, where else would I be? The line went quiet for a moment. Mom, I need you to know that I'm going to fight this. Legally? I mean, I can't let you destroy Dad's legacy out of spite. Harold's legacy. I repeated slowly. Tell me, Wade, what do you think your father's legacy actually is? The company, the business he built from nothing. We built from nothing. I corrected. Your father and I, together. But I understand why you'd forget that detail. Fine, we built. That doesn't change the fact that you're destroying it now. I set down my pruning shears and sat on the garden bench Harold had built for me after my first cancer scare 10 years ago. I'm not destroying anything, Wade. I'm protecting it. From who? From you. The honesty of my answer seemed to catch him off guard. Several seconds passed before he responded. From me. Mom, I'm trying to honor Dad's memory. I'm trying to build on what he created. What you're trying to do is cash out as quickly as possible so you and Brittany can live a lifestyle you haven't earned. My voice was calm. Matter of fact, the buyer you found, Stewart Industries. They specialize in acquiring companies just to strip their assets and fire their employees. Did you know that? Silence. I thought not. Did you know that they plan to close our Austin office and move everything to Mexico within 6 months? Did you know that 43 families would have lost their jobs by Christmas? That's not... I didn't. You didn't ask. Wade, you saw a big number and dollar signs, and you didn't ask what would happen to the people your father and I spent 40 years building relationships with. I could hear Brittany in the background, her voice urgent, but too distant to make out words. The employees would have found other jobs, Wade said, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret Henley has been our office manager for 18 years. She's 56 years old, with a high school education. When do you think she'd find another job that pays what we pay her? Tom Rodriguez has been with us since he was 22. His daughter just started college. How exactly do you think he'd afford tuition after getting laid off? Business isn't charity. Mom, sometimes people get hurt. You're right. Business isn't charity, but it's not pillaging either. There's a difference between making hard decisions and making selfish ones. The conversation was interrupted by what sounded like an argument in Italian. Hotel staff. Probably. I could imagine the scene. Wade and Brittany standing in an opulent lobby, looking increasingly disheveled as they tried to negotiate with people who didn't care about their American entitlement. We'll be home tomorrow, Wade said finally, and we'll settle this properly. I look forward to it. After he hung up, I sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what would come next. I knew Wade would lawyer up the moment he got back to Austin. I knew he'd try to find some way to challenge the trust structure, to claim I'd manipulated Harold or taken advantage of his illness. What Wade didn't know was that I'd been preparing for that possibility, too. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus again. Let me guess, he said, before I could speak. They found out about Milan. Call number 38. They're flying back tomorrow on Uncle Robert's dime. And Wade's threatening legal action. He thinks he can overturn the trust. Marcus chuckled. I assume you're ready for that. 2. Pull the video files. I said, all of them. The board meetings, the family dinners, the conversations in Harold's office. If Wade wants to claim I manipulated his father, let's show everyone exactly who was manipulating whom. For the past 3 years, ever since Wade had started making noises about my competence, I'd been recording our interactions, not secretively, exactly, but not obviously either. A small digital recorder in my purse during family dinners, voice memo, apps running during phone calls, security cameras in the office that captured more than just break-ins. I'd learned long ago that documentation was protection, especially for women in business. Especially for older women in business. How extensive are we talking? Marcus asked. Extensive enough. Wade, telling Harold that I was getting confused about basic business concepts. Wade, suggesting to his father that maybe it was time to transition me into an advisory role only. Wade, discussing with Brittany how to convince me that selling was in my best interest. And Harold's responses. I smiled, remembering Harold defending me every single time. Harold explaining to Wade that I was the strategic mind behind 90% of our successful deals. Harold telling his son, quote, your mother could run circles around most CEOs half her age. And if you can't see that, you're not as smart as I raised you to be. Wade won't be expecting that. Wade's never expected much from me. It's been his greatest weakness. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and settled in to review the financial reports from our international divisions. Meridian Trust wasn't just a holding company. It was an actively growing enterprise. While Wade had been focused on the flashy Austin headquarters and the domestic client base, I'd been quietly expanding our reach into markets he'd never even considered. Our partnership with a sustainable manufacturing company in Germany was generating more revenue than our entire Texas operation. Our licensing deals in Japan had doubled in value over the past 18 months. The software patents we developed for inventory management were being used by companies across 3 continents. Wade thought he'd sold our company for $8 million. What he'd actually done was sell the least valuable portion of an empire worth more than $15 million. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. Brittany apparently had found a way to send international texts. I wondered if she'd borrowed someone's phone, or if she'd convinced Uncle Robert to include messaging in his emergency assistance. I typed back, the biggest mistake of my life was letting you into my family. I'm correcting that now. The response came immediately. Wade will never forgive you for this. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something settle deep in my chest, something that felt like relief. Good. I typed back, maybe now we can have an honest relationship. I turned off my phone after that and spent the evening reading. Harold had always said that the best business decisions were made with a clear mind and a calm heart. Tomorrow would bring drama, accusations, and probably lawyers. Tonight, I wanted to enjoy the peace of a house that finally felt like mine again. Around midnight, I walked through the rooms Harold and I had shared for so many years. The living room where we'd planned our first expansion. The kitchen where we had celebrated our biggest contracts. The office where we'd worked, side by side, building something we were proud of. For 3 years, this house had felt like a mausoleum, a shrine to a man who was gone, and a business I thought I'd lost control of. Tonight, it felt alive again. I stopped in front of the family photos lining the hallway, looking at images of Wade as a child, a teenager, a young man just starting his career. In every photo, he was smiling, confident, surrounded by love and support. I'd given him everything I could think of to give him: education, opportunity, unconditional love, and a path to success. What I'd apparently failed to give him was respect for the people who'd provided all those things. Tomorrow, he'd learn what it felt like to lose them. And maybe, if I was very lucky, he'd also learn what it took to earn them back. Wade's rental car pulled into my driveway at 6:43 p.m. the following evening. I'd been watching from the kitchen window, timing their arrival with the same precision I'd once used to schedule international conference calls. They were 12 minutes later than the flight tracking app had predicted, which meant they'd probably argued about something during the drive from the airport. I didn't rush to answer the door when Wade's familiar, impatient knock echoed through the house. Instead, I finished washing my dinner dishes, dried my hands carefully, and smoothed my hair before walking slowly to the entryway. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures standing stiffly on my porch. When I opened the door, the difference in their appearance was startling. Wade's usually immaculate suit was wrinkled from travel, his hair disheveled, and his eyes held a wild, desperate look I'd never seen before. Brittany looked even worse. Her makeup was smeared. Her designer clothes looked slept in. And she was clutching an oversized purse, like a life preserver. "Mom," Wade said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." "Of course. Come in." They followed me to the living room, the same space where this had all begun just 4 days ago. But the dynamic had shifted completely. Where Wade had once stood confidently, now he perched on this edge of the sofa like he was ready to bolt. Brittany sat beside him, her eyes darting around the room as if she was cataloging items for potential value. "I've brought my lawyer," Wade announced, trying to reclaim some authority. "He'll be here tomorrow morning. We're going to contest the trust documents." "That's certainly your right," I said pleasantly, settling into my favorite chair. "Though I should warn you that legal challenges to properly executed trusts rarely succeed, especially when there's 30 years of documentation supporting their validity." Brittany leaned forward, her composure finally cracking completely. "You can't do this to us, Agatha. We have a life planned. We have commitments. I quit my job at the hospital because Wade said we'd be set for life." "You quit your job?" I raised an eyebrow. "How presumptuous of you." "We bought a house," Wade said quietly, "based on the expected sale price. The down payment is due next week." "That does sound like a problem." I agreed. Poor financial planning often leads to such difficulties. Wade's careful control slipped. "Stop playing games. You know what you've done? You've stolen what rightfully belongs to me." "Have I?" I pulled out a manila folder from the side table beside my chair. "Let's review what rightfully belonged to you, shall we?" I opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table. Wade and Brittany leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. "This is your father's will," I said, pointing to the first document. "As you can see, he left you the family business as it was legally constituted at the time of his death. That included the corporate name, the office lease, the employee contracts, and the domestic client relationships." Wade grabbed the document, scanning it frantically. "It says, I inherit his share of Herald Industries, which was 60% of the company." "Correct. 60% of Herald Industries as it existed 3 years ago." I pulled out another document. "However, this is the amendment your father signed 18 months before his death, formally acknowledging that the most valuable assets had been transferred to separate entities in which he held no ownership stake." "That's impossible," Brittany said, snatching the paper. "Harold wouldn't have signed away his own assets." "Harold didn't sign away anything," I corrected. "Harold acknowledged what had always been true, that those assets were mine to begin with. I was the one who developed the patents, negotiated the international contracts, and purchased the commercial properties. They were never his to leave to anyone." I watched Wade's face as the reality sank in. His expression cycled through confusion, anger, and finally, a kind of hollow understanding. "You planned this from the beginning," he whispered. "I protected what I built," I said, just as any smart business person would. Wade stood up abruptly and began pacing. "No, this is more than that. You let me believe I was inheriting a multi-million-dollar company. You watched me make plans, make commitments, quit my job to focus on running the business full-time. You set me up to fail. I gave you exactly what your father left you," I said calmly. "If you chose to make assumptions about the value without doing proper due diligence, that's not my responsibility." "Due diligence," Wade's voice cracked. "You're my mother. I trusted you." "Did you?" "Because from where I sit, it looks like you trusted that I was too stupid and too grief-stricken to notice what you were planning." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a voice recording I'd saved from 8 months ago. Wade's voice filled the room, tinny but clear, from the phone's small speaker. "Brittany, I'm telling you, she has no idea what she's sitting on. Mom thinks the company is worth maybe 3 million tops. She's always been clueless about the financials. Once I convince her to sell, we'll have enough to buy that house in Westlake and still have millions left over. The old lady will be so grateful for our help. She'll probably give us power of attorney over her personal accounts, too." The recording continued for another 30 seconds, with Wade laughing about how easy it would be to manipulate his scattered mother into making decisions that would benefit him. Brittany's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Wade made that call from your kitchen last December." When I was visiting for your housewarming party, you'd stepped out to get wine, and Wade thought I was in the bathroom. I was actually right around the corner, holding my phone. Wade sank back onto the sofa, his head in his hands. You've been recording us. I've been protecting myself. I corrected, something I learned to do during 40 years of being underestimated by men who thought they were smarter than me. I pulled out another phone and played a second recording. This one from Wade's conversation with his father just 6 months before Harold's death. Dad, I'm worried about Mom. She seems confused about basic business concepts lately. Maybe it's time to start transitioning her into more of an advisory role. You know, let me handle the day-to-day operations before she makes a mistake that costs us everything. Harold's response was crystal clear. Son, your mother has forgotten more about business than you've learned yet. If you think she's confused, you're not paying attention. She's been running circles around competitors half her age, while you've been focused on the office politics. Wade's voice on the recording became petulant. I just think fresh perspectives might be valuable. Some of her ideas seem pretty outdated. Harold's laugh was audible, even through the phone's small speaker. Wade, your mother closed a $2 million international deal last week while you were complaining about the coffee in the break room. Maybe worry less about her perspectives and more about developing your own. When the recording ended, Wade looked physically ill. Brittany was staring at him with an expression of dawning horror. You told me she was losing her mind, she said slowly. You said the doctors were concerned about early dementia. I never said that. Wade protested weakly. You absolutely said that. Brittany's voice was getting louder. You said that's why we needed to act quickly, before she made decisions that would hurt the family finances. I cleared my throat. There were never any doctor's concerns about dementia. My last cognitive assessment, done as part of my annual physical 4 months ago, showed no signs of any mental decline whatsoever. I can provide you with the medical records if you'd like. Brittany turned to stare at Wade with a look of pure disgust. You lied to me about everything. I didn't lie, Wade said desperately. I was trying to protect our future. Mom's getting older, and I thought, you thought you could steal from your own mother and convince your wife it was for her own good. I finished. The question now is what you're planning to do next. Wade looked around the room like a trapped animal. I'll contest the trust. I'll hire the best lawyers in Texas. I'll prove that you manipulated Dad when he was sick. With what money? I asked reasonably. Your cards don't work. Remember, Uncle Robert paid for your plane tickets. But I doubt he's prepared to fund a prolonged legal battle against trusts that have been properly maintained for 3 decades. I'll figure something out. You could, I agreed, or you could accept reality and decide what kind of relationship you want to have going forward. Brittany stood up abruptly. I'm not staying for this. Wade, fix this, or I'm done. I didn't marry someone who would lie to me about millions of dollars and then lose it all through sheer stupidity. She stormed toward the front door, her heels clicking angrily against the hardwood floor. Wade started to follow her, then stopped and turned back to me. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice broken. I want you to decide whether you love me or just what you thought I could give you. I said quietly, because one of those relationships has a future and one of them doesn't. Wade stared at me for a long moment, then walked out without another word. Through the window, I watched him and Brittany have what appeared to be a vicious argument beside their rental car. She got in on the passenger side, slammed the door, and they drove away. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Wade's number. Mom, I need a place to stay tonight. Brittany threw me out of the hotel. The spare room is available. I said, the rent is $50 a night, and you'll need to help with housework. $50. Mom, I don't have $50. Then I guess you'd better start figuring out how to earn some. There was a long pause. Are you really going to make me homeless? I'm going to let you experience what independence looks like when you don't have a safety net. I said, consider it an education and personal responsibility. I'm your son. Yes, I said, and it's time you learned what that actually means. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen making coffee for 2, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. The morning sun streamed through windows that sparkled. Wade had cleaned them yesterday as part of his weekly responsibilities. The house had never looked better or felt more peaceful. "Good morning, Mom." Wade appeared in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. The designer suits were long gone, sold months ago to help pay for basic necessities. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years, actually." He moved to the cabinet and pulled out 2 mugs, a gesture that had become automatic. "I finished reviewing the quarterly reports last night. The German partnership is exceeding projections by 18%. I smiled, handing him his coffee black, the way he'd learned to drink it, when expensive coffee makers and fancy creamers were no longer in the budget. And the Tokyo expansion. The contracts should be finalized by the end of the month. Your instincts about the market timing were perfect. It had taken Wade 3 months to stop being bitter about working for his mother instead of inheriting her company. It had taken another 2 months for him to realize that he was actually learning more about business than he ever had when he thought he was entitled to success. The transformation hadn't been easy or pretty. After Brittany left him at the hotel that night, Wade had spent 2 weeks sleeping on friends' couches, trying to borrow money for lawyers to contest the trust. One by one, his friends had stopped returning his calls when they realized he had no way to pay them back. Uncle Robert had refused to fund a legal battle after Harold's lawyer confirmed that the trust documents were airtight. Wade had finally shown up on my doorstep 3 weeks later, exhausted and humbled, asking if my offer of the spare room was still available. "I'll pay the $50 a night," he'd said, standing on the porch with a single suitcase, "and I'll do the housework. I just need somewhere to stay while I figure out what comes next. What comes next is up to you." I'd told him, "But if you're staying here, you follow my rules." The rules had been simple, but non-negotiable. No drinking, no drugs, no overnight guests without permission, rent paid weekly in advance, household chores assigned and completed without complaint. Most importantly, if he wanted to be part of the family business again, he would start at the bottom and work his way up based on merit, not bloodline. "I have a meeting with the Henderson Group this afternoon," I said now, settling at the kitchen table with my coffee. "Would you like to sit in?" Wade's eyes lit up. "Really? They're one of our biggest potential clients. They're also notoriously difficult to work with. I thought you might learn something from watching how to handle demanding customers." 6 months ago, Wade would have bristled at the suggestion that he needed to learn anything. Now he nodded eagerly. "I'd appreciate that. Should I prepare anything in advance? Review their file, study their previous partnerships, think about why they might be hesitant to work with us, and how we might address those concerns." "Already done," Wade said, pulling out a notebook filled with his handwriting. I stayed up until midnight, researching their corporate culture and recent market challenges. I felt a familiar warmth in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when Wade was 8 years old and had spent hours building an elaborate Lego castle, determined to get every detail perfect. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that focused, determined child. I was grateful to see glimpses of him returning. "Wade," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I'm proud of how hard you've been working." He looked up from his notebook, surprised. "You are." "I am. When you first came back, I wasn't sure if you were here because you genuinely wanted to change, or just because you had nowhere else to go. Honestly, at first, it was because I had nowhere else to go." Wade's face reddened slightly. "I spent those weeks on couches, planning how I was going to prove you wrong, how I was going to get back what I thought was mine. It took me a while to realize that what I thought was mine was never really mine to begin with. And now," Wade set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "Now I realize that I wasted the first 35 years of my life trying to live up to an image of Dad that wasn't even real. I thought being a man meant taking what I wanted and never asking for help. I thought strength meant never admitting when I was wrong. And what do you think now? I think Dad was successful because he was smart enough to marry someone smarter than him. and humble enough to listen to her advice. Wade's voice was steady, serious. I think I missed out on 35 years of learning from the most capable person I know because I was too arrogant to see past my own assumptions. The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of my phone. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. Brittany. Wade saw the name on the screen and tensed. Are you going to answer it? I'm curious what she wants after all this time. I accepted the call. Hello, Brittany. Agatha. Hi. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, less confident than I remembered. It's fine. What can I do for you? I was wondering, is Wade there? I've been trying to reach him, but his number's been disconnected. I glanced at Wade, who was shaking his head vigorously. He's here. Would you like to speak with him? Actually, I was hoping to speak with you first. I have something I need to say. Wade raised his eyebrows, but didn't object when I put the phone on speaker. I owe you an apology. Brittany continued. A big one. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong to encourage Wade to do what he did. What changed your mind? I asked. Life, she said with a bitter laugh. After I left Wade in Austin, I moved back in with my parents. I've been searching for a job for 6 months, and I must say, it's quite a humbling experience. I lost sight of the value in striving for what I want, rather than waiting for it to come to me effortlessly. I understand. I found myself reflecting on our marriage, on the person I used to be when I was with Wade. I found it difficult to connect with that individual. I felt a sense of entitlement and greed, fully at ease with the notion of exploiting someone who had only shown love and support for their child. Wade's gaze was fixed on the phone, his expression a puzzle I couldn't decipher. I reached out to express my apologies. Brittany continued, but I also have something significant to share with Wade. This week marks the filing of the divorce papers. All I seek are my personal belongings. Nothing more. I'm not worthy of anything beyond that. Brittany, Wade spoke softly. There's no obligation to do so. Absolutely, I do. Wade, you stumbled, but I only deepened the wounds. I encouraged you to view your mother as a barrier rather than a supporter. I persuaded you that exploiting her was, in some way, acceptable. I carry a deep sense of regret for my past actions, and I sincerely apologize for them. Once the call ended, Wade and I remained quiet for a few moments, lost in our thoughts. How have you been? I finally found the strength to ask. With a wave of relief washing over him, he began to speak, his words flowing effortlessly. Emotional, yet liberating, the person I transformed into during my marriage to Brittany was not someone I respected much either. Wade looked around the kitchen, reflecting on the simple breakfast we had shared and the heartfelt work that awaited us both. Now, I feel that I might be transforming into someone my father would have respected. Your father always thought the world of you, I said gently. He genuinely hoped you would embrace a feeling of pride within yourself too. The afternoon meeting with the Henderson group truly surpassed what I had anticipated. Wade asked insightful questions, carefully noted details, and offered reflections that showed he had put in significant effort to prepare. When they asked about our succession planning, I confidently pointed out Wade as our director of operations, a position he had truly earned through 6 months of committed 60-hour weeks and outstanding performance. After the clients left, Wade and I stayed in the conference room, reviewing the notes together. I have a feeling they will sign, he said, rifling through his documents. I completely agree. That was absolutely remarkable work today. Wade's smile disappeared, giving way to an expression of profound thoughtfulness. Mom, can I ask you something? Without a doubt, while you were putting those trust structures in place and protecting the assets from me, did you anticipate that it would result in this situation? With my commitment to grasping the complexities of the business, you can rely on me to master it completely. I contemplated the question with deep reflection. I hoped it would. Still, I had prepared myself for the possibility that you could walk away entirely and decide to remain silent forever. What steps would you have considered in that scenario? I would have taken charge of the company myself, until it became overwhelming, then entrusted it to someone who would care for our employees. I paused, uncertainty creeping in. However, the idea of living without you, day after day, for the rest of my life, would have been simply too much to bear. Wade's eyes shimmered with unspoken sorrow. I sincerely apologize for the experience you endured due to my actions. I deeply regret that my choices have placed you in a position where you feel conflicted about prioritizing your own well-being while also caring for me. You never gave me the chance to choose, I said. You made a choice about the kind of son you wanted to be. I made certain that choices held true significance. Had I chosen a different path, had I persisted in our legal struggle, you would have realized that respect is not a commodity to be inherited or stripped away. It should be deserved, not handed out. Wade nodded with a contemplative expression. I think I'm finally starting to understand that idea. As we got ready to leave the office, Wade turned to look at me one last time. Thank you, Mom. Your support means everything to me. What is the reason behind this? For your unwavering faith in me, for uncovering the potential of who I could evolve into, instead of simply accepting who I had been. I smiled, pondering the intricate journey that had brought us to this significant point in time. That's the heart of being a mother. Wade, we hold a profound concern for your well-being, granting you the freedom to falter while standing by your side as you navigate your path to achievement. Even when your children see you as a weight to bear, in that particular moment, I observed that's when they genuinely need our help the most. 6 months ago, I thought I was about to lose my son. Instead, I had found him. The genuine nature of him, concealed under veils of entitlement and established beliefs, the man Harold and I had always envisioned he would become. It was only after experiencing profound loss that Wade came to understand the true essence of what mattered in life. It took a courageous step and the readiness to risk everything to protect the connection that was my everything. As we emerged from this office together, it struck me that this was the real meaning of triumph. It's not just about the moment you prove your point, but the time when everyone fully understands the importance of what you advocated for. Now I find myself captivated by you, the one who has chosen to listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever gone through something like this? We'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. In the meantime, I'm sharing 2 other narratives on the final screen that our audience holds dear, and they are bound to surprise you. We truly appreciate your presence and commitment to being here with us at this moment.